Anyway, amphibian conservation in the Southeast. My name is Mark Mandika with the Amphibian Foundation. Thank you for coming tonight. We're going to talk to you a little bit about our conservation initiatives here in the Southeast, focusing on some of our most imperiled species. And I have kind of the original, what I call the original Amphibian Foundation power trio right here, of the gopher frog at the top, striped newt in the middle, and the frosted flatwoods salamander at the bottom. The gopher frog and the flatwoods salamander were at one time quite common. I'm just curious if anyone in the room has seen any of those three species. Well, yeah, the people at the foundation can't raise their hands, but yeah, okay. I'm just curious because part of what we're trying, these are all native species that most people have never seen or even heard of, and it's a challenge. But yeah, welcome. Hey. Also, there's food coming, and when it comes, I'm not the type of person to be offended if you want to get up and get some food, and maybe I'll even grab something. The Amphibian Foundation formed in 2016 primarily to focus on the charming little critter in the front, the Frosted Flatwoods Salamander, and we have since been expanding, and I'm going to give you an update from our perspective over these last 6 or 7 years, just to make sure we're all on the same page. You guys know amphibian, just to make sure. We know we have frogs. There are several types of amphibians. We have frogs. Everyone knows them. And then we have salamanders, and that's where we start to go off the rails a little bit because not everyone's seen a salamander. People often confuse them with lizards. Even Georgia laws confuse salamanders with lizards. But then there's a third type. We can't talk about them today, but we have Sicilians, because we don't have any Sicilians in Georgia, but there is a fossorial limbless group of amphibians that I like to make sure people at least know what they are, right? Tony agrees. And so amphibians have a lot of characters, traits in common with each other, but they also have this other thing, which is why we started the Amphibian Foundation, which is that they're disappearing globally. 43% of the world's amphibians are documented as in decline or already extinct. That is more than amphibians than mammals and birds combined. And I just updated the numbers here. There are currently 8,680 known amphibian species, and 43% of them are in decline. Right now, there are 3,500 species in decline or already extinct, and that's just a staggering number. And it's why we started, because here in the Southeast, there wasn't much being done, and the last time a group of animals disappeared at such a rate, it was the dinosaurs. And so, as I'm moving, the beginning of this talk is kind of bleak. You know, we work in a lot of bleak situations working in these critical conservation programs. We work in this concept here of the extinction debt. It's just the future ecological cost of present-day habitat destruction. For the same token, what we're witnessing today on the landscape are the amphibians that are surviving, past insults to their habitat, and a lot of them are just struggling to keep going. So I thought for tonight what I would focus on is like some of the problems that I've seen from our work here in the Southeast, some of the main problems for our amphibians here in the Southeast. Every time I look over, it just looks so good on the screen. Kermit looks great. And so primarily the first threat that you might consider for amphibians is habitat loss. It's kind of a no-brainer. There's not as much habitat for amphibians as there used to be, but that's a common problem for a lot of different groups. I like to highlight for the Southeastern talk the longleaf pine habitat because most of the species that we focus on are endemic to the longleaf pine. They rely on that type of habitat, and it's been reduced to 3% of its original historic range. And so obviously any species that rely on that type of habitat are going to be bumming. So we're talking about gopher tortoises, indigo snakes, there's a lot. But I will also say that there are a lot of organizations working on gopher tortoises and indigo snakes. Thank goodness. These guys, the flatwood salamanders, at the time when we started, they didn't have anybody looking out for them. So when we talk about the longleaf pine, I just want to take a second and highlight this is a historic map of longleaf pine. And you can see it was the predominant ecosystem in the Southeast. I'm going to show you a map of the flatwood salamander's historic range, and it overlaid quite nicely with this one. So this is the historic longleaf pine range. And then here is kind of a representation of what we're looking at today, where the green circles are the current longleaf pine. And it exists in a mosaic of mostly not longleaf pine, and some of it's slowly being restored. But right now, these green circles, I guess, would add up to 3% of what the historic range was. And we're going to come back to this map again later too, but it's important that you have a little perspective on what that impact is having on not just the amphibians, but yes, the amphibians. Other factors in exposing amphibians to EPA acceptable limits of agricultural compounds. My lab mate in school was studying the effects of these compounds on amphibians and how it was changing the male toads into female toads. It was changing their gonads, and it was changing their brains so that they couldn't communicate in their normal ways, and that's a big problem. And that's, like I said, EPA acceptable limits of these compounds. So it's pretty terrifying. These amphibians are responding, and we should be paying attention to them. Another major impact, and sometimes when I have more time, I highlight invasive species, but I like to give focus to the primary invasive species because they're now killing hundreds of millions of amphibians per year in the United States. So outdoor pet and feral cats repeat hundreds of millions, and that's every year, and that's just in this country. Emergent infectious disease, that's what I mean. The beginning of this talk is very bleak. Also, emergent infectious disease, us moving one disease from one part of the earth where amphibians have a tolerance to it to a novel place where the amphibians have no resistance to it. Most famous example of this is in central Panama, where chytrid was wiping out 85% of the amphibians in that area. We have detected chytrid fungus here, and the food's here. Okay? Yes, thank you, Patrick. And then the last major thing I wanted to point out was the shifting climate and drought. This is something that we've been working right up against over the last 7 years. And I'll talk about some of the species and how this is particularly acute for them. And I'm extremely biased because I come from what I like to refer to as a puddle background. My background is in puddles. That is my first puddle. I don't know, like there are some more technical terms, and we'll get to those, but I always think of that as my first puddle. That was in Massachusetts, and that's where I first really got to know some amphibian communities, and it's responsible for making me like I am. This is the type of wetland that really gets me excited. This, it's called ephemeral wetland, vernal pool, seasonal pool, temporary wetlands, but, it's also a puddle. I mean, and sometimes they're even more puddle-like than that. And I wanted to highlight this because I find these types of wetlands fascinating. And here are some of the species here, right here in Atlanta, that use these ephemeral wetlands. And they're delightful species. They're really amazing, but they will only breed in a puddle. They will not breed in anything else. So what looks like a swampy depression in the woods to us is really critical habitat for these animals. People see something like this, and there's a lot of times people will make it a permanent pond. These ponds need to dry out every single year. It needs to be a puddle. If it doesn't dry out, then it's no longer suitable for these really important species. And so we're monitoring particularly the bottom two, the spotted salamander and the marbled salamander, and we'll get into that a little more soon. Just to firmly establish my puddle background, I did my undergraduate at UMass, and then I was in the Everglades for my graduate work. And the Everglades was one huge ephemeral wetland. I was blown away. It was perfectly wet for periods of the year and perfectly dry for other periods of the year. And that makes it impossible for fish. And most amphibians are quite delicious to fish. And if they can take the advantage of breeding in a wetland that has no fish in it, that's really the whole game. They're willing to risk it all by breeding in a puddle that will hold water for a couple of months. So that really puts a big time sink on this. All of the species that we started with, gopher frog, striped newt, and flatwood salamander, are ephemeral wetland breeders. They're obligated. They will not breed in any other type of wetland. And it gets even crazier with some of these species because some of them will only breed in the puddle they were born in. So that makes it really tough when you're talking about conservation. I thought first that I would start with how we started, the Frosted Flatwoods Salamander. We started this project. Our logo is a larval Frosted Flatwoods Salamander, if you were curious. And flatwood salamanders have declined by 90% since 1999 when they were listed under the Endangered Species Act in 1999. Since then, they've declined by 90%. It's a species that's considered at imminent risk of extinction. In 2008, flatwood salamanders were split into two species, the reticulated bishop eye. Let's see if this works. Maybe not. Oop, sorry. Okay, and on the right cingulatum is the frosted flatwood salamander. I can't tell them apart. Can anyone? Anyone tell them apart? No, they look very, very similar. And so that was in 2008. In 2014, we had a structured decision-making workshop where we spent a week with all the people who knew the most about the species, which wasn't much, gathered together. We spent a week and we went through this structured decision-making framework where we pitched a bunch of hypotheticals and had a bunch of modelers. I can't remember their names, but they were nice, so I just put nice modelers there. They were, during our discussions, modeling things out on the fly, and by the end of that week, at least statistically, we had determined that to stop the species from crashing immediately, we had to set up captive assurance colonies. So it's a kind of a profound decision when you make a decision that the only way to keep the species going is to remove some of them from the wild. It's not a decision that you should ever take lightly, but they're crashing so fast. So here's their range, their historic range, and I have a little longleaf pine. There's a remembrance of the longleaf pine habitat, so you can see that in the center of it was the flatwood salamander range. And I heard stories of rainy nights when the roads were covered with flatwood salamanders. So this was their historic range, and here's their current range. Yikes. So I'll zoom in, and this is really, really bad. The top orange dot is Francis Marion. The middle dot is Fort Stewart, Georgia. These two orange clusters are St. Mark's and Apalachicola National Forest. These blue dots are the bishop eye, the reticulated species that was split off in 2008. And so if we go back to the flatwood salamander and look at it on this map of where longleaf pine still exists, there's only two spots where they still exist. And it gets worse. So that spot, that one dot in South Carolina, no detections in 15 years. It's still surveyed every year. We're just not finding any salamanders. This one, Fort Stewart, one wetland. I've been surveying that wetland and all the others. We've been surveying that wetland and all the others since 2012. There's just one there, and we found them about 50% of the time in that one single wetland. And then the last place in Florida was hit directly by Hurricane Michael. Those ponds were underneath the ocean for 6 days, and it did not kill them all, which is kind of crazy. How did they survive the ocean? But we have not had detections like we did prior to 2018, so we're still waiting to see what the ultimate impact is on that. So it's really, really bleak. Okay. Then I wanted to point out another major thing about these flatwood salamanders, because, they breed in a very peculiar way and are completely dependent on fire. I'm waiting to click this button to see what this looks like. Right? I should do that. Let me try. I'm sorry. Okay. Yeah, that's pretty okay. I did not know the screen was going to be so great, but I'm glad, because I put this poster up. This is a poster that we commissioned being drawn about the flatwood salamander, and it explains their crazy lifestyle. So they're completely dependent on fire, as are longleaf pine endemic species. That whole ecosystem is maintained by fire. It burns in their habitat naturally every 1 to 3 years. But humans more or less suppress those fires, and that changes the habitat and that makes it no longer suitable for this species and many others. That's the nutshell. So longleaf pine is being restricted to 3% of its historic range, and those 3%, there's a lot of fire suppression going on, which makes that habitat not suitable for this salamander. They meet. We don't know for sure. We expect that they meet in the margins, which is the part of the pond called the ecotone. That is where all the love happens for marbled salamanders in this ecotone. No, it's not going to work. But right here, you see the wetland and the upland. That ecotone in between the two is where the magic happens for flatwood salamanders. That's where they nest. These salamanders nest in ponds when the ponds are empty, dry. They go and breed in the ecotone, and then they leave. Those eggs wait and develop until seasonal rains fill the pond. The eggs are inundated, and they hatch. That is crazy risky in so many ways. They're just leaving their eggs out, and it's just nuts that that's how they do it. And then when you add in shifting climates to that really delicate, sensitive reproductive cycle, the eggs are drying out in the field now. They're not getting the rain that they need to. It takes a lot of work to harvest the eggs when they're going to die, but that in order to find eggs, you're talking about sending out teams of people on your hands and knees and looking for these tiny eggs. They're big on this screen, but they're really small in the wild, and they once they hatch, they are in their aquatic stage. They're like the top carnivores of these little puddles. Very difficult to find, and then they metamorphose. And so it's all in this really cool fire-dependent longleaf pine ecosystem. while it's up, any questions on this or anything? This is the first time I've ever displayed it, and I'm really glad it's such a great monitor. I have a thing I'm still raising money for this project. So far, we've raised enough to pay this amazing illustrator to draw this. As I get more, I'm offering it basically free to any science teacher in the salamander's natural range. That's the project. So if you go to that site there, you can sign up to get a poster. Right now, it's only if you're an educator, though. All right, moving on. All right. Okay, so August 9th, 2016, that is the day we started the Amphibian Foundation. Crystal and I, she's in the back there. That's the Amphibian Foundation. That rack, see that rack? That is in our basement. And at the time, August 9th, 2016, that was the world's only captive colony of the Frosted Flatwoods Salamander. It was a very nervous period, having this very rare, very vital colony in our basement. As part of this project, here's our partners down here. Yeah. We moved in 2 months' time to the Blue Heron Nature Preserve where we are today, and in Buckhead. And first thing we did was we set up a salamander lab for the Frosted Flatwoods Salamanders. Get them out of our basement and into a lab where we can control the temperatures and everything. This is one side. This is a little miniature longleaf pine ecosystem, and those are some breeding chambers over on the right. I will come back to that. We also built a couple of dozen of these triphasic mesocosms where we could create little pieces of longleaf pine habitat in these outdoor cattle tanks. These are also right at Blue Heron Nature Preserve. And we have a bunch of them. So there's about 300 salamanders in these things, flatwood salamanders. We have some nice signage. It's a city of Atlanta park, so you can walk right through, and we have signs explaining what we're doing there and encouraging people not to mess with them. And then to go out into the field, we've been arranging these trips out to Fort Stewart. We have Roy, who's a biologist on Fort Stewart. We coordinate with him and just bring anyone that we can down to sample as many of these wetlands on the military base. All the historic flatwoods sites on this military base, they're restricted military, and they can't even do military activity in these ephemeral wetlands. It's pretty cool because there's only a couple of dozen of those, but it's pretty neat that the Endangered Species Act is so powerful that you can rope off little parts for these salamanders. But there are explosions happening in the background and everything. And the main wetland where we're finding these salamanders isn't the historic wetland itself, but an adjacent tank rut. A tank came through and put a big rut in the ground and made a depression that collects water. And the salamanders have been using that because their actual wetland's been degraded. So here's just some more shots. It's just a wonderful area. And we're going after larvae when we're doing these. It's the only time that you can really find these salamanders. It's a nightmare trying to find their eggs. It's impossible to find adult salamanders without traps set to intercept them on their migrations. So we go after these larvae. There's a picture of Crystal. Yay. There's Crystal. Thanks. And they have this bright, bold stripes, and it makes them practically invisible with the flooded grasslands that they breed in. Salute. But like I said, we have been going out there to Fort Stewart for a while, and we're mostly targeting the larvae. At Apalachicola, Florida Fish and Wildlife does those exhaustive egg surveys. They collect these little batches of eggs and carefully place them in these trays. So these are eggs that were desiccating in the field. These were long past the time that they normally would have hatched, long past ready to hatch. They're fully developed. So when we get them to the foundation, we take them out one at a time by a little spoon, and you just put a single drop of water, and they just hatch immediately. So that's a baby flatwood salamander in a drop on a teaspoon. That is nuts. And so this is the other side of the salamander lab, and we've had as many as 400 or 500 salamanders in this little room at a time, but mostly it's about 100, almost 100 right now. Here's a larvae in the lab. And I'm giving you a little, just because most people don't have any clue of what these things are. I think they're really beautiful, and I just like to share so people just know what they look like. This disappearing salamander. That's the larval stage. As they get a little further along, the adult patterning starts to come in on top of the larval patterning, and it gets very mottled. And then this one just metamorphosed and is taking its very first steps. It is just really cute and clumsy. Yeah, anyway. So, I just think they're adorable. Well, look at that guy. They're just so cute. And they're really striking. There's black and white salamander. And we have gotten really good over the last bunch of years of taking these water-stressed salvaged eggs from the wild and rearing up nice, big, beefy, healthy adult salamanders. And I'm very delighted by that, because we had to, there wasn't anyone to ask. This had never been done before, and we had to figure a lot of this out as we went. I'm very proud of my team, and we have beefy salamanders. But that was the first part. The second part was, for us, major breaking news right before Christmas 2021, when we had produced our first eggs ever. And so it was Anthony. I don't know, he's in the room, but I won't point him out specifically because he might get embarrassed. But he's the one who found these eggs, and I didn't believe him at first. We had been working on this since 2012, and so that was quite an experience. Trying to not get emotional. It was a very emotional experience, and they kept going. They kept laying eggs. And then we had other groups set up that were also laying eggs, and it seemed like we had finally maybe gotten everything lined up just right. I was just amazed. The Newsweek carried the story. They thought it was worthy, and I was like, that was big news. So very happy about that. So back to this picture that you guys saw before. This is our indoor mesocosm and our ecotonal rain chambers, mimicking just that nesting area at the upper margins of the pond. And so I think, this is where I just was really excited putting this together, but this is where all the places where we started finding eggs in order. So the first batch, we got a lot of eggs, and then we started getting some eggs up in the next one, and then we even got some over here too. And we just had a lot of breeding salamanders all at once, and it was just very exciting. And so, that asked the question, where will our babies go? We were always focused on how we're going to stop them from dying, how are we going to keep them from going extinct. Suddenly we have kind of a more exciting question to ask, where will our babies go? There's very little habitat suitable to release them into, and so what we have done is we got permission to start a conservation breeding working group. We've gotten a lot of zoos involved. They're listed here. And as of last year, we are not the only place on Earth with this species. There are 4 other places. And that takes the pressure down just a little couple of notches at least. But also, these are really great, talented, passionate places. And next year, we're going to have some flatwood salamanders going overseas to the Manchester Museum. So that's going to be really cool, making this an international program. So the status update on that. In the ex situ, in the out of the wild world, we're doing well with small numbers of animals in several different institutions. But in the field, in the wild, in situ, for the first time this year, they're not being monitored on the landscape. In the last few years, a lot of our state and federal partners have backed away from the project. And, I just like to say that because we rely on those partners as the source for these animals in a lot of cases. And if no one's out there in the field, we don't have a source for the animals yet. So we're working that out. Last year was the first year since we started where there was water in the ponds, but we were not able to get any surveys done. So hopefully that'll turn around soon. And then I usually just talk about flatwood salamanders, and I'm going to have to pick up the pace a bit now. I apologize because there's two more, but we don't have as much to say about these, but they are totally worth mentioning. Gopher frogs, Georgia's rarest frog. And here's a gopher frog. And so there's some of our partners working on this project, and we have taking two tacks for gopher frogs. We are doing rearing a bunch up to try to breed them in outdoor mesocosms. So we have 3 groups of frogs in outdoor mesocosms that we're rearing to adulthood. And then what our research staff are doing now are assisted metamorphosis. We're in the middle right now. We've released most of them, but we still have 20-something frogs to release. We've released 300 and something frogs so far this year, 300 and something last year as well. And we can rear up to 750 gopher frogs a year. And here's Crystal when we were setting up the adults in the outdoor mesocosms. They're so great. And then here's some this is from this year's Head Start. There's Josh at Warm Springs. Feeling pretty good about gopher frogs. And then there's a gopher frog tadpole too. And then so we have 10 of those cattle tanks just set up for gopher frogs, so there's a lot of sloshing around. There's a gopher frog right there. And, they metamorphose. They have to get out of the water quickly. They're very high-strung, jumpy animals, and they also have a tendency to eat each other. So you have to be very careful with how you handle them. And then, so where will our babies go for this? For the last 2 years, because of a multi-state agreement, we've been rearing up our frogs and releasing them at a constructed wetland in Alabama. So that wetland back there obviously looks very new, but also it was built just for gopher frogs. Alabama has a single gopher frog population, and we're trying to double that with this project here. All right. So that's what Head Start, and we drive them down. So these are Atlanta City frogs coming down through the country to get released, and it's very rewarding to release these animals. And this project is still early enough where we don't know how it's doing yet. This is only the second year. We'll start monitoring to see if these guys are showing up at the wetlands and not getting chowed by fire ants or something horrible like that. And then the status update for the gopher frogs. See, this one was much shorter than the flatwood salamanders. We have growing colonies at the foundation to reach adulthood. There is a multi-state agreement where all of the states in the range of the gopher frog are working together to try to make sure we can get them more evenly distributed throughout their natural range. We've been doing that gopher frogs, thousands of them over the years, head starting them and then releasing them. I'm going to have to stop on striped newts because I want to ask for questions and stuff. Just keep going? Really? All right. Okay. All right, I'm going to keep going. If you don't like newts, you feel free to go. But newts are great, and we have a very rare one, the striped newt here. They only exist in Georgia and Florida. And here's my best depiction of the striped newt. There's some of the partners down there. This has been an exciting project because this is the first one where we were releasing babies born at the Amphibian Foundation. So we've been doing that since 2018. It's very satisfying. At least in theory, there are more striped newts out there than there were when we started, and they're also really cute. All right. So with the striped newts, we pool them up, all the organizations that have bred them, we pool them up. Then they get nifty little tattoos, you know, so that we can tell them when we find them in subsequent years. And then here's releasing a striped newt. It's just also very rewarding. And so the status update for them, you know, we have a dedicated newt lab. If you come to the foundation, that's the first thing you walk past are the newts. Another multi-state initiative. This one's run by the Coastal Plains Institute, where we pool our young newts and release them. So hundreds of newts we've released so far. Let me just see. So some early stage projects. And I'm just going to click through, but I just want you to see a Pigeon Mountain salamander. They're beautiful, and this is one of our early stage projects. They are Georgia endemic. They are right near where the three states meet, but only in Georgia. They don't exist anywhere else on the planet. And this was like last week. We got everyone. Last week we are out there to start a project that is primarily a disease surveillance project to make sure this species that only occurs on one side of one mountain in Georgia isn't susceptible to emergent infectious disease. So this was our first trip at getting the protocol down. This is what it's like to swab a salamander's feet. That's you, Cole. Yeah. Just looks so good on this screen. Another new project, the blue spotted salamander that we're working with a population out on Long Island. And then, you know, we try to do a lot with our local critters too. Namely, yes, right now is marbled salamander season, and it's the beginning of it. So we have our there. Okay, so this is our research team, and there's a marbled salamander down there. So right now, or at least last week, we were finding males. Males generally migrate first to the wetlands and form what's called a congress, and they, I guess, figure out who gets the best nesting spots, and they're waiting for the females, which usually arrive kind of around Halloween. So keep your eyes peeled for marbled salamanders. It's that picture, that's at Constitution Lakes. Yeah. Spotted salamanders, another amazing species that we have right here in Atlanta. They have these in Massachusetts as well. That was the first puddle I worked in, was witnessing migrations of these species, and they do migrate. They don't live in these ephemeral wetlands. They only breed in them, so they need to travel distances to get to these wetlands. But there are, at least in theory, more spotted salamander populations starting in Atlanta, thanks to some reintroduction work at Clyde Shepherd, establishing them out there, and at the Atlanta History Center as well. And if you want to see some salamanders, just come to the annual salamander stroll during the Atlanta Science Festival. Marbled salamanders. Can't get enough of them. These are another terrestrial breeder. This is a nest. Those look like BBs. That's a female. The larger, grayer is the female, and the male is whiter. We also had luck breeding them in our outdoor mesocosms in October 2021. So that date is coming up, and we have some ladies in our mesocosm, or at least a single lady that is looking like she's in the mood, and we might have some more luck again, which is really great because we've used these for some reintroduction projects at the Atlanta History Center. And then, in conclusion, am I yeah? All right. Our educational programs are a huge part of what we do here, and that is mostly run by Crystal. But we do have a lot of programs, volunteer and intern training programs. We do a lot of teaching. I guess in the next week or maybe the week after, this is a Georgia Tech class called Drawing on Nature that I do a lecture or two each time. And I just love this picture because everybody's just jazzed with that spotted salamander. It's just really great because a lot of those students hadn't seen one before. And you're like, not only is this the most amazing thing, but they live right here in Atlanta. Our Conservation Research Bridge program is 1 to 3 semester apprenticeships where students can come. I just can't get over how it looks there. This is at the fall line, and it just looks so nice. But students can come to work with us and just get hands-on and get swampy for 1 to 3 semesters. We offer a master herpetologist program because, of course, so this is in person and online. We started teaching it online right before COVID started, and then since then we've had just people take this class from all over the world. The first assignment is just plot where you are on the map, just so everyone can see, and it's always very, very rewarding. And it's great to have such a community of herpetologists. And then there's Critter Camp. This is where it all started. Critter Camp is our summer camp. It predates the Amphibian Foundation, and it's basically, when this started, we were running Critter Camp to fund flatwood salamander conservation, and since then it's just kind of exploded to all this craziness that we're doing today. But there are unlimited opportunities to get involved. There are lots of ways if you would like to. And so one of the ways is to join us as a member. And also there is our mailing list right there, stayinformedamphibianfoundation.org. And then there's our main websites right there, and my email if you have any questions. And then that's it. Any questions?